Window Stoppers. A true story, written and narrated by Mountain Eyes of Mountain Eyes Narrations, and originally posted under the name Phantasmal Poppy. This story takes place many years ago when my grandmother was a young woman. Granny came from a huge family, with many siblings and half-siblings. Out of her full siblings, the first to marry was a sister whom we'll call Doris. Now, sometime early on in their marriage, Doris and her husband moved from the middle of nowhere to, still in the middle of nowhere, just into a community of other mountain folk that didn't consist of all of her relatives. The house was small, but decent for a growing family. Shortly after Doris had her first baby, Doris's husband asked my granny to go over and spend a few nights with her. I cannot remember what his job was at the time, but he had the graveyard shift and didn't want to leave his already frail wife at home alone right after having a baby. The evening Granny went over to spend with her sister, she found her brother-in-law hammering in some window stoppers. Basically, these were very long nails that he would hammer into the wooden frame of the window from the inside. They would allow the window to be raised up about an inch to allow in air, but any further would cause the window to catch on the nail heads and stop. Now, I know what you must be thinking. That sounds really horrible and more like something someone would do to keep someone trapped inside, right? Fortunately, Doris's husband was just a protective guy who lived in an area where security systems weren't yet a thing, so he had to make do with his own ingenuity. That night, Granny was up late watching TV. Her sister and infant niece had already dozed off, but Granny found herself strangely wide awake, despite the excitement of helping with a new baby. You know that old warning in video games that goes, "You can't sleep because there are monsters nearby"? Well, I'm pretty sure Granny has a finely tuned, in real-life version of that sense. As Granny was watching her show, she started to hear scraping. At first, she thought it might have been part of the show, but it quickly changed into a scrabbling sort of sound. Granny turned down the TV to listen better, but the moment she did, it stopped. She waited for a few moments before turning the volume back up. Sure enough, the noise started again. Down went the TV volume once more. Off went the noise. Volume up. Sound came back. Mind you, every time Granny turned the sound down, she had to get out of bed to turn it off on the TV itself, because this was one of those huge sets they had back in the 1960s. You know, the sort that looked like it was built into an entertainment system and weighed more than a couple of grown men. Well, hopping out of bed like that was bound to wake the baby, and Granny wasn't about to undo hours of her and her sister trying to get this caterwauling babe down for a nap. So the next time she heard the noise, she paid careful attention to where she thought it may be coming from, before clicking off the television set. The noise stopped, but not fast enough. Granny managed to hear an abrupt scrape a split second after the show winked out, and that scrape did not come from the TV. Slowly, She made her way into the room directly across the hall. The lights were out behind her, but the moon was shining brightly on the side of the house she was facing, so she could make out a few things in the darkened room. As she stood outside the door, she listened, wondering if the scrabbling noise would start up again. When several moments went by without her hearing anything, she took a deep breath and let the door to the other room creak open. At first, she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but as she stepped into the room, she could feel air wafting in a way like the window was open. When she went to check, Granny was horrified to see that the window had been pried up from the outside, stopping just at the heads of the nails that her brother-in-law had put in before he left. The scary thing is that they never found who tried to break in on Doris. They never had another problem again. However, Granny is sure to this day that her being there is what prevented the intruders from coming inside. As for her brother-in-law, even though Granny says it was common for people to fashion their own window stoppers like that years ago, I have a feeling that her brother-in-law was suspicious of one of their neighbors, since this was a time when people still left their doors unlocked. Either that, or maybe he just had a bad feeling and acted on it, the same way any smart mountain man would do.